Well, hello there, amazing students, and welcome to week 6. Wow, time flies when we're having fun, right? Dr. J here, and I'm excited to talk about personality disorders as we kind of go down the winding spiral staircase right here in disorders, so to speak. It's a little bit of a rabbit hole. I got to be honest, I have fun creating these backgrounds sometimes with just PowerPoint. I got to be honest, and all I do is go into PowerPoint and I type in the title, and sometimes, abnormal psychology. Sometimes I'll just type in something like personality disorder, see where it goes, and then abnormal psychology, and the AI tool or whatever will help create a background. And I just think it's fun sometimes to come up with a random picture, and that's how I choose these. By the way, students ask how I choose these sometimes. This was one that I chose earlier, and I thought, wow, this is kind of appropriate because this is how diagnostics works, right? It's like a spiral staircase that just goes deeper and deeper, or like a rabbit hole that just goes deeper and deeper. And I thought this picture was very appropriate, and we're going to continue to talk about some things this week as we get into personality disorders, which is kind of a subsection of diagnostics, if you will. It's a kind of separate section. An Axis 2 disorder, it's a separate section within the DSM manual itself. Nonetheless, very, very important, and certainly creates a lot of diagnostic challenges. Also creates a lot of treatment challenges and a lot of personal challenges, right? So I'm kidding about that, but kind of serious too about the last part, as personality disorders is something that can have a tremendous impact on people around us. Again, particularly cluster B disorders, which we'll talk about here shortly. So nonetheless, I know I'm throwing some words out. Everybody's like, what does that even mean? Well, good. Don't worry. I got you covered. Don't worry. So we're talking about some things in terms of diagnostics again this week, and I'll give you an overview of the submissions. But before I do, I want to talk about writing and using research, as a number of students have had some questions, and certainly a number of students have had some questions in terms of their submissions. So I want to clarify some things for you in terms of how to use research within your submissions, within your writing. This will enhance your writing. It'll actually make your submissions easier. Trust me when I tell you, it's not going to seem easier on the surface, but after you figure it out and kind of find your groove, it'll definitely be easier for you, and you'll certainly learn more and get more out of the process. And I want to use an example. I'm going to use a writing example. I'm going to pull up a writing of mine. And certainly something that's very appropriate for this class, as it talks about the DSM and kind of the evolution of the DSM, or the history of the DSM, if you will. So give you a little context here. This is a section of a paper that I wrote, a very large paper that I wrote. It's 300 plus pages in total. So it's a very, very large, extensive project that I was involved with. And this particular section here, as it applies to diagnostics, talks about the DSM. And in this section, as I wrote about things, there are several references in here. And I'm going to read some of this to you and give you a little play-by-play of what I'm talking about, because I want to help you to understand not only how to use research, but the types of research that you're going to use to help validate your statements. Okay? So the DSM evolved largely from a collection of mental illness morbidity statistics used by the federal government for census reporting. Where did this come from? This is a piece of information that I gleaned from an introductory section from this resource. This resource right here is dated. Students turn things in, and sometimes they'll say, this is a little dated. Maybe pick research that's from the last 20 years or so, unless there's a very specific reason. In this particular case, the very specific reason that this is because it's referencing the original manual that was published in 1952. By the way, this is the pride of my collection in terms of DSM manuals. I have every one except the DSM-2. I could find a DSM-1. I couldn't find a DSM-2. Imagine that. So the first publication made an attempt to place mental disorders into usable categories. However, little information was made available to the initial manual to describe psychological phenomena, hindering the clinical utility of the text. Okay, so I started out with a little bit of, hey, here's what the original manual was about. Now I'm going to talk about some of the challenges and things that happen from a couple of guys who wrote a summary article looking at a lot of different stuff. Okay, that's the gist of it. Now, in the world of primary, secondary research, a manual or something along these lines technically is really tertiary in nature. It's taking a whole lot of information and putting it together. We could say it's a secondary source, but I'm going to say it's primary, in particular with this particular paper, because we were writing specifically about the DSM. So all the DSMs were sort of primary research in this particular case. This is secondary research. Okay, this is where people have taken some articles together and they've come up with an opinion. Two guys took in a bunch of information, created an opinion, a collaborative opinion, based upon several different articles or studies that they looked at. Now, this particular content, if we were looking at the DSM, there's not really a lot we can do with, quote, studies, so a lot of this is going to be a survey information, maybe taking some statistics out of the manual per se. Okay. With the publishing of the third edition of the manual, and this is it, the DSM-3 from 1980, psychiatric diagnosis became more standardized by creating a consistent definition of each mental disorder by operationalizing diagnostic symptoms. Understand there's DSM 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Diagnostics change in versions. It's kind of like software. You've got version 10 of the software, and then it's like 10.1 and 10.2 and 10.3. It's all kind of about the same with a couple of little enhancements, and then we get to version 11. DSM is the same way. So we talk about the 3 or the 3R. The R was a slight reversion of the 3. We talk about 4 versus the 4TR, or the 5 versus the 5TR. The text revision just means we expanded the text. We gave it more nuance. We provided more information. The framers of the DSM-3 adopted a neo-Kraepelian approach by characterizing symptoms that could be measured, described, observed, and communicated to clinicians. Kupfer, first, Riger, 2002. Advancement of the DSM-3 enabled individual clinicians to push aside idiosyncratic diagnostic models in favor of a constant nosology, which greatly improved inter-rater reliability in all settings. Look at that word a couple of times, okay? So when I go back, and again, just to give you a play-by-play of this, there's several articles in here. This is an abbreviation. There's several articles in here. And I want you to have a frame of reference of how this worked. I started with a question. And in order to answer that question, I went to the research and found a few pieces of information that would help me to answer this question. Now, this particular project was much more elaborate. The question was one thing. 97 questions came out of the one thing. And along the way, I read just about everything I could get my hands on with regard to diagnostics. I wanted to give you a little preview of what the references look like for this. You can see I did my homework quite extensively. Now, this is not to say I found a little piece of information from an article and I shoved it into something that I wrote. This is me spending a couple of years reading a lot of stuff on one particular topic in diagnostics, okay? So focusing on one area of diagnostics, I read all of this information. So I'm not saying that you're going to read 97 articles to write a paper, but I am saying there's a few things that's happening. I see some students turning in 5 and 6 pages of content with 1 or 2 references. I see some students turning in 2 pages of content with 15 references. So it's really all over the map. And I'm not saying there's a number that should or shouldn't be. It's like that spiral staircase. It's just going to continue winding down. It's a matter of how deep that you want to take it, but it's not uncommon that students will find 3 or 4 things. You might start with one article, and then you're going to find one or two articles that are referenced from that article that you're going to read that's going to help further answer that question. That's how I wrote this paper, gang. I didn't start by reading 150 articles. I started by reading 5 of them. I actually, in all honesty, this particular research project, this was my diagnostic research project for my doctoral paper, for my doctoral degree, my doctoral research. My tongue twisted. My paper started as a 10-page paper that I submitted in my diagnostics class. And I became fascinated with the topic so much so that the professor of the class, who was also the dean of psychology, adopted my project, took it on, and we wrote a monster submission on diagnostics. Now, when I talk about things like this in terms of these references and so forth, I read this stuff as I went through my program, and I read this stuff extensively for many, many months and years in the development of this particular project. And so I want you guys to be thinking about this in terms of how you're going to structure your papers. Now, what I'm saying, you're going to read and structure these things, but you'll read an article, and you might read a second article and a third article, and that helps you to answer a question. I'm just going to do it very quickly. One more thing I want to talk about to give you a reference here in terms of how to do referencing or how to think about or conceptualize the research that we're using. By design, the DSM is a categorical classification that divides mental disorders into types based on criteria sets with defining features. And this is a direct quote. I always encourage students to use direct quotes sparingly or not at all. If you're writing a paper and it feels like the direct quote should be there because there's no other way you can say it, or because you need some type of expert validation for what you're saying, sure. In this particular case, gang, this was expert validation because this was a direct quote from the intro of the DSM-4. Okay, so that was something that had expert validation that I want to say, look, they even said in the introduction of the DSM-4 that this is the methodology here. This is what we're doing. Okay, I'm teeing up dimensional constructs, by the way, so I'm talking about something and building a case for it. But I needed to have that credibility from the diagnostic manual. So unless you're doing something like that, or there's no other way that you can say it, avoid using direct quotes, especially stop using so many of them. This is not about pulling a piece of research and putting it in there because it's exactly what it says, or I have to put a direct quote in there. You want to use things in your words. All of this content, gang, was all information that I read from an article that I said, okay, this is really good. It applies to, this is how I want to answer a question. It applies to the topic. This is exactly what I want to say. And now I'm saying it in my words as opposed to Sprock's words or as opposed to Schmidt's words. Okay? Hopefully this is starting to make some sense. Start with 1 or 2 articles that answers the questions. Read those articles. Use the information you just got from those articles to answer your question. Make sense? That's how you do it. And that's how you write a short paper. That's how you write a long paper. You start with your question and you continue down the rabbit hole as deep as you need to go to fulfill the objective of the submission. Now you might just have a couple of questions on a milestone or a weekly assignment in this class. You might be writing a doctoral paper, or you might be doing a large project for a class. I have a 400 level class that I teach, and some of the 400 level classes you will all soon be taking will have long papers where students will write 10 or 12 page submissions. And again, it starts the same way. They start with a couple of articles, and as they continue down the rabbit hole a little bit to answer the questions, it's kind of the length of the project. So I hope this makes sense, and I'm going to dive in and I'll tie it into this week's submissions a little bit, so hopefully it'll solidify as we talk about Module 6. Everybody's like, wow, that was a lot, okay? So I don't like to go deep into the writing because now students freak out and see how long it is. It's a very lengthy project, but that was a project that took a very long time to produce. So be thinking in terms of at some point you'll be writing 10 and 12 page papers, but you're probably not going to have to do much in that range until you get into the actual publishing of research. So describe the ways in which social support can promote education and awareness. Okay, so that's some good stuff that we'll talk about this week a little bit. Mostly we're going to talk about this week, actually explain how personality disorders are unique compared to other diagnoses and describe behaviors associated with personality disorders. Discuss ways to enhance compassion and empathy for people who struggle with psychological disorders. That's some good stuff too. That's actually in some of the readings for this week. And I wanted to stress that this is where it starts, gang. The readings. Okay, read this information. It's going to talk about the 3 different subtypes of narcissistic personality disorder. This is really research dependent, by the way, depending on the 3 subtypes. I look at Ted Milan has 4 different subtypes of it, so I tend to favor his research. The psychology of narcissism. Okay, so this is another good TED Talk that you're going to watch, 5 minutes long. Borderline talkbacks, fantastic, by the way. You should absolutely make a point to watch this. But all of this stuff in here, you're going to want to go through, gang, and make sure you do this homework up front, so to speak, in terms of just be watching this stuff over the next couple of days. Have this information in your brain as you start to prepare to write your discussion post and do your module submission this week. I'm sorry, your journal submission. Module submission. Week 6 module. We're going to talk about narcissism this week in the discussion board, and you can take this any way you want, but please keep it in the, fictional range, TV character, movie personalities, historical figures, something like this. We don't want to talk about classmates or people we know or anybody like that. We want to keep it into people that we don't know, but the open field beyond that. But we're going to talk about in what ways does this person exhibit grandiosity or this self-importance. So start by learning about narcissism. Start by learning about the 3 subtypes of narcissism and start looking at this first. Now the gears are starting to turn as you think about different people, and then you're going to answer the question based upon the research, this article or other research that you may pull in. Again, if you've done all this, you clearly have a lot of information to answer the questions and something that is easily researched, right? Easily to put in and reference. I want to stress that. You guys are building a case in what you're talking about. You're validating your statements. Now, for the assignment this week is a journal submission. I tend to look at journal submissions as a little bit of a lighter, more of a personal opinion in some statements, but the same goes here. If you've done the research, you've done the readings, and you've learned about some of this stuff, it's going to be very easy for you to answer these questions and have research right in front of you. So talk about this from the research perspective the best that you can, but certainly this is going to be a little bit more light, a little bit more informal this week as we talk about 5 sentences. We stress the 5 sentence range because students have a tough time writing sometimes, and sometimes that first sentence is an introduction. The second sentence is like a restatement of the question, and then they briefly answer the question. So focus on about 5 sentences, which is a full paragraph. So be thinking a full paragraph. This is roughly a page and a half, 2 pages, like the 2-page range. If you find yourself hitting 3 pages of text, you've probably gone on too long. Look at your content, truncate it down a little bit, but please write more than 1 or 2 sentences as well, because as some of you have experienced, I have no problem docking points for content that is on the light side. It's about depth of what you say, not about the words on the page, because in some cases students will have those 2 or 3 sentences that don't really say too much. So I want you to think about the words that you're putting into your sentences. Okay, so But at the same token, this is a light week, gang, so just have some fun with this submission, go through your readings, and be prepared and gearing up for what's to come. And that's Project 2. Okay, so this next week, we're going to be focused on Project 2. So all of your submissions that we've done thus far, again, if you've done the readings, you've done the research, you've put in the time, when you get to Project number 2, it's going to be easy peasy for you, okay? I don't want to say that, but it'll be much easier for you. You've set yourself up for success. By the way, as I was thinking about that research project, and I did my master's program in business. What I did from start to finish is every single course I focused on an aspect that I can pull that I could then tie into my research later. And what I mean by that is every time I had the option to write something, I wrote that focused on diagnostics, or I wrote that focused on my research in the business program. And so you're having all this information put in front of you for these projects. If you put in the time and the resources along the way, what you're going to find is when you get to the projects, they're much easier for you because you did all the grunt work along the way. Now you get to the last assignment, and it's going to ask you things related to the research you just read about, the stuff that you just wrote about. So now you're just expanding on what you've done, and it reinforces the information, but it also makes it easier for you. So another thing that I want to point out to you and put on your radar is in week 8, which is coming up, we're going to be putting together the e-portfolio information and submitting those. This is not a really stressful thing other than the fact if you don't have an e-portfolio set up, there's some information in here to help you get set up. You should all have something. Those of you that are in the psych department have something set up. I believe you should have had this set up, or get with your advisor to get help going on this, or career services will help you. But you want to start putting together your e-portfolio and put your information in there, and it's really a simple process to get this going. You guys will have some fun with this. So one last thing I did want to talk about before I go is a number of students asked me for tools and resources to kind of enhance their learning. Diagnostics can go very deep, as some of you have experienced. And the thing that you really just deserve to be focused on at this level is just looking at the symptom sets and looking at the big picture categories is what you want to look at in terms of depression or psychosis. You want to look at things like personality disorders as a whole. You want to look at different symptoms of these particular diagnoses of these disorders, not necessarily this particular disorder versus that disorder and why the different nuances are of these particular things, because sometimes this level it's not that important. Just want to try to get things in the ballpark, so to speak, and you'll fine-tune it as you get deeper and deeper. But there are some things that can help you. Now, some students had asked me about, there's a couple of students that talked about that they had a DSM that they were referring to. These are fantastic. I'm going to put a link in the message that's going out this week in terms of this tool. We found these. I remember when I started in grad school, we were handwriting them and creating ones. And then I think like a year later, we found these and we were like ripping all mine out and then putting these in. But I can't tell you how helpful these are in terms of putting things together. This particular set, if I recall, comes with like some little quick guides. There's some other quick guides and things like that might be handy for you. If you don't have a DSM, just kind of put this in the back of your mind, check out the page just so you kind of have an awareness of it, because tools like this are invaluable. I can assure you, you will be buying a DSM at some point if you're in a clinical program for sure. Most likely if you're in a mental health program at all, at any level, social work, probably. You'll likely be buying that hard copy or at least the soft copy DSM at some point, and it's about $150, so want to get your monies out of it, this is a fantastic tool to use for that. So I hope these videos are helping you. I hope this information helped you this week in terms of getting your writing on track. If you have some questions specific to writing, shoot me an email. The writing lab on campus is great. I can't stress this enough. My undergrad program, I submitted probably 80% of the papers. By the way, when I say that, that's a lot, because I submitted, I would say on average, a paper to maybe 1.2, 1.3 papers per week for my entire program, because we would sometimes have 2 papers every week that had to be submitted. So lots and lots of papers. I submitted about 80% of that to the writing lab, and that's how my writing got to be better and better over time, because writing is a skill that you have to develop. And if you're just relying on the class, that's fine, and the feedback from your instructor. Understand, I can only coach you little bits and pieces in terms of the writing. You're going to have a couple of writing classes, but you can work with a writing coach on every single submission if you choose, and your writing gets better and better and better, like every week. You might not always have a submission that you can submit, but when you do have an opportunity to submit those written submissions to the writing lab, it'll help you tremendously. So I hope this feedback helped. Let me know if you have some questions. Have a great week, and I look forward to chatting with you in the discussion board.